what I also realized is that was also the reality of the educators that taught in my neighborhood. I didn't think about that at the time. But by the time I made it to middle school, many of the gangs and the drugs had started to saturate the school system. I grew up during the height of the crack epidemic. By the time I made it to middle school, many of the teachers that taught in my neighborhood that came there with the best of intentions, many of them were starting to burn out. And I can't say that I blame them. Many of them were becoming frustrated. And some of those teachers were even giving up. I was lucky enough to meet with an old teacher of mine. Her name was Miss Taylor, the Dragon Slayer. That's what we called her. Now it turns out she knew all along we called her Miss Taylor, the Dragon Slayer. And she says, baby, I knew the whole time y'all called me the Dragon Slayer, and I did my best to live up to it. So when I met with Miss Taylor, I was standing up and I looked at her and I said, Miss Taylor, I had a lot of things I wanted to get off my chest. I said, Miss Taylor, I feel like when I was in school, that people gave up on me. I feel like I didn't have a chance. And she looked at me and she said, boy, sit down. Now, I was raised by my grandmother. She was born in 1920. She taught me that if a teacher told you to do something, you did it. It's very simple. And she said, if that teacher's wrong, then I'll deal with it. She said, but if you're wrong, I'm going to deal with you. Right? But that was my, that was my grandmother. That was my experience. But Miss Taylor, she looked at me and she began to explain some things to me that I didn't understand. She said, Ian, there were a lot of good teachers in that school. But she began to explain to me what happened when funds need to be diverted for other programs. And I began to understand how educators could become frustrated when they wanted to give their all and they chose that profession because they wanted to make a difference and they wanted to make an impact. But when they went home at night, they felt like they weren't making a difference. I can understand becoming frustrated. I can understand going to school every day or going to work every day, wanting to have one time with each and every student. But because of increased class sizes, it makes it more difficult to do that. I can understand taking money out of your own pocket, spending it on a child that is not yours. At the end of the day, sometimes you feel as though it has gone unappreciated. These are things that Mrs. Taylor talked about having done. These are things that I know many of you, if not all of you, have done. These are things that my wife, working in the middle school, has done. And when I met with Mrs. Taylor, she was up there in age, probably in her 80s. And like my grandmother, sometimes she would forget things. She would start a story and she'd forget where she was at, so she'd start over. She'd start over. Finally, she paused and I said, Miss Taylor, may I say something? I think I may have even raised my hand. Can I say something? And I'm going to tell you, I asked for permission because when I was in school, teachers could beat you with a yardstick. Some people may know what I'm talking about. Has anyone ever seen that movie, The Lion King? Okay. There's a scene in that movie where all the hyenas are down at the bottom of this valley and they're down there shucking and jiving, cracking jokes. And all of a sudden, the Lion King's brother comes to the top of the valley and casts a shadow down onto the hyenas. And they just see the shadow of a lion and they get scared and they look up. And one of the hyenas says, oh, it's just Scar. We thought you was Mufasa. And when they say Mufasa, all the other hyenas start to say, ooh, don't say Mufasa. Right? That's how I get when I see a yardstick. That's how I get. When I was in the 10th grade, I had 2 A's. One in Spanish, and the other one was in history. Now my history teacher, she was mean. But I was one of 3 students that had an A in her class. One of only 3. It was a very hard class. I can remember sitting in that class, hearing another student, a young lady, talking about college prep classes. Even though I was in the 10th grade, and the name college prep says it all, I didn't know what college prep classes were for. So after class, I caught up to that young lady. I said, hold up. Can you tell me a little bit more about the college prep stuff I heard you talking about? So she stopped right there, and she took the time to start telling me a little bit more about college prep. And I have to be honest, I started to get excited because I didn't know anything about college prep. I started getting excited for 3 reasons. First reason is I was talking to a girl, of course. The second reason is, you know, I'm going to admit, I used to talk to a lot of girls in school. But the problem is they didn't talk back to me. But on that day, she was talking back to me. So we were having a conversation. I was even thinking about asking for a beeper number. But the third reason I got excited is because I started thinking maybe I can go to college. Maybe I can leave South Central LA. Maybe I can be the first person in my house that goes to college. And then I can talk to some college girls. You on a football team? Yeah. But I went home that night, I was excited. I remember I could hardly even sleep. I got home the next day, I went to see my counselor like the young lady said I should do. He gave me a piece of paper and said, you need a recommendation from your teacher. After class, I took the piece of paper, I walked up to Mrs. Ski, my little chest was all puffed up. I said, Mrs. Ski, I was wondering if you would give me a recommendation for college prep history. Silence. Mrs. Ski broke that silence. She said, young man, I believe college prep history would be too difficult for you. The next thing she said as though she were doing me a favor. She said, besides, not everyone's cut for college. I can remember walking towards the door thinking to myself, dummy, you know you weren't not smart enough for college. What were you thinking? But I can also remember thinking, why didn't she just give me a chance? I knew maybe I wouldn't get an A in class, but I knew I wasn't going to fail because I had requested it. I walked out of that class and I never gave college prep courses another thought. Now as educators, I'm not sure what you know about your students. I mean, apart from are they a good student, are they a bad student? About their grades, are they an A student? You know, I'm not sure what you know. What I'm saying is on a personal level. Here's what I do know. Most of the entire time I was in school, I lived with my grandmother. So if I had back to school night, it was my grandmother that went up to the school. If I had parent-teacher conference, it was my grandmother who marched up to that school. If I got in trouble, it was my grandmother that marched down that hallway. And my grandmother, she wore these shoes that sounded like the whole army was coming. You knew she was coming. And she carried a big old purse, and in that purse she only carried 3 things. She carried her bus pass, she carried her house keys, and she carried her belt. If she had ever seen The Lion King, you know what she would have named that belt too. But at no time the entire time I was in school did anyone ever say, son, why did you live with your grandmother? If they'd ever asked that question, I would say I lived with my grandmother because my mom passed away. My father's in prison. Now my grandmother, she did the best with what she had. But again, she was born in 1920. She only had a 4th grade education. She really couldn't help me with my homework. I remember she helped me with my math homework one time. I handed it to the teacher. The teacher gave it back. And every question that my grandmother had tried to help me with was wrong. And she did the best that she could. The first step of the ACT strategy is ask questions. Mrs. Ski never asked me questions, and I believe that if she had asked questions, if she knew a little bit more about me, I believe maybe her answer would have been different that day. Here's what I also know. I know that sometimes it's difficult to ask questions because oftentimes we condition ourselves to believe that asking certain questions is not okay. But on the other side of that coin, I believe and what I know is that asking questions can oftentimes reveal something that will help you to help that child. Oftentimes, asking questions will reveal the answers that will help you understand and know what that young person is dealing with outside of the classroom. It will allow you to find resources in order to help that student. And that oftentimes changes the behavior. Because I know it's difficult, I have a 3-level strategy here that I talk about to make it a little bit more easy, or to help make it easier to ask questions. It's very simple. Level 1 is simply asking yes or no questions. It's an icebreaker. Just a yes or no question. No threat. Oh snap! Did you get a haircut today? You got all those lines cut up in your head? Even though you know you got a haircut. It's just a yes or no question. Yeah, I got a haircut. How do you know? Very simple. Level 2. I'll move through this quickly because I know we're a little bit behind. It's more of an open-ended question. It's your who, what, when, where, why, how. These I like to call the tell me a little bit more about that. My wife is good at the tell me a little bit more. She said, hey, who's that like that picture you on your Facebook? Who, huh? I said, I don't know. She said, you know what I'm talking about? I said, I don't know what you're talking about. Her name is Shaniqua and she got 2 Q's in it. I don't know her, but she know you. Oh, that's Shaniqua. I know, okay, I know. And then she said, you're going to have to tell me a little bit more about that. Right? Now I don't know what to say. It's just open-ended. She's just going to sit there and listen to me. Right? That's what I'm saying. It's just an open-ended question. And the level 2 question can also allow you to follow up on something. An example of that would be, you know that do you play sports? Yes. Tonight you play the best team in the state. On Monday, it allows you to follow up. How's your game go? So you're building trust, helping to knock down the wall that I know I had built up around myself. Mr. Lyles would always ask me questions. Why this? Why that? And at first, I was kind of like a ninja. I'd just be blocking all his questions. You don't know me. Write a book for the FBI or something. Right? But I had built up this wall that he could not penetrate. But lucky for me, Mr. Lyles knew something about me that I didn't know about myself. He knew about that wall. So where most people give up, when most people would give up when I assume that defensive pose, they give up. Mr. Lyles, instead of giving up, he changed his format. He'd ask easier questions, questions that he knew I wasn't afraid to answer. Then he would take those answers and he would go and find resources within that prison. And he would come back and give them to me. And he did that over and over and over again. And slowly but surely, that wall began to come down until he knew more about me than anyone else. Here's what Mr. Lyles learned about me. Here's what Mrs. Ski didn't know. I was born 2 months premature. My mom was walking up a flight of stairs. She didn't know this, but a woman she had an argument earlier was standing above her holding a pot of boiling water. 7 months, almost 7 months pregnant, as my mom made her way up those stairs, that woman dumped that water on top of my mom and sent her tumbling down the stairs into premature labor. She received 3rd-degree burns to over 25% of her body.